Fox News alert, Black Lives Matter organization blaming America for the pain and suffering of the people in Cuba amid protests. The far-left group now demanding the U.S. lift its decades-long embargo on Cuba after praising its communist regime. This is Outnumbered. I'm Emily Campagno. Here today, my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kayleigh McEnany, and host of No Interruption on Fox Nation, Tomi Lahren, and in the center virtual seat, Washington Times opinion editor and Fox News contributor Charlie Hurt. Now, this isn't the first time that the Black Lives Matter organization has praised Cuba's communist regime. Back in 2016, BLM glorified Cuban dictator Fidel Castro following his death, writing, quote, "As Fidel ascends to the realm of the ancestors, we summon his guidance, strength, and power as we recommit ourselves to the struggle for universal freedom. Fidel vive." BLM has also praised Cuba for harboring FBI fugitive Assata Shakur, who escaped from prison in the U.S. back in 1979. Shakur was convicted of being an accomplice in the 1973 killing of New Jersey State Trooper Werner Forster, who left behind a wife and a 3-year-old son. She's also a suspect in a 1971 hand grenade attack on a New York City police car that injured 2 officers. And the feds also say that Shakur led a Black Liberation Army cell in 1972 tied to the execution-style murders of 4 NYPD officers. Charlie Hurt, this, however, is who the BLM organization is glorifying, and it sort of begs the question, the universal freedom that they're talking about, we are certainly not seeing that on the streets of Cuba as their people are protesting and sacrificing their lives against the communist regime.
No, this whole story really does expose BLM for what they're really all about. It's not, they're not about justice. They're not about battling oppression. It's about power. It's about political power, and that's why I think they have absolutely no problem with the oppressive regime in Cuba and the atrocious, truly atrocious human rights record that they have. If anything, BLM should be out in the streets protesting that regime and protesting their treatment of their own people. Instead of this. And of course, it also, sort of reveals this larger problem, which is this sort of civics illiteracy, this historical illiteracy that has taken over far too many people. And quite frankly, we as a country, we're doing a very bad job of reaching those people first, American citizens, and explaining, teaching them history, teaching them civics, teaching them what is great about this country and how it is that you preserve those freedoms that obviously the regime in Cuba does not care about.
Right. And Tomi, Charlie mentioned sort of the civics ignorance and how that shapes talking points. And for example, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has finally broken her silence on the issue, but blaming the U.S. for its absurdly cruel embargoes and blaming Joe Biden for, she says, President Biden for maintaining the Trump-era restrictions. We're going to get her here on a soundbite. Get your thoughts on the other side.
One of the things that we want to make sure that we communicate is our solidarity with the Cuban people. And what's extraordinarily important for us to communicate as well is the actions and U.S. contributions to the suffering of Cubans on the island as well. And that is directly related to the embargo, the U.S. embargo. The cruelty is the point. And I outright reject the Biden administration's defense of the embargo.
I'll tell you guys, listen, if you speak to Cuban Americans, those that came to this country, and you ask them what they think about the embargo, and you ask them what they think about the Obama administration and what they did to, quote unquote, open up Cuba, many of them will tell you that that infuriated them to their very core because it just gave that regime legitimacy. So to hear Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talk about this, I don't think she's talked to a lot of Cuban Americans, and I don't think the Democrat Party as a whole has spoken to a lot of Cuban Americans and those that have immigrated. Many of them are conservative, and that might be the reason for that. But I also also want to go back to that point about BLM, because BLM is finally starting to receive a little bit of backlash after praising the communist regime, after praising Castro. And I'd just like to ask folks, where have you been for the last several years? This is nothing new. We know what we need to know about this organization. They are proudly have Marxist roots. Their founders have Marxist roots. We've seen what they've done to our streets. We've seen them loot targets. We've seen them destroy our country, at least for the last year, in the name of justice. And now people are finally starting to come out and say, maybe this organization isn't what we thought it was. Maybe they aren't dedicated to justice. I just have to ask folks, are you surprised at all? Are you just going to start to realize what this organization really stands for? And furthermore, I'm happy that some folks in the Biden administration have come out and have condemned communism, but they also need to look at the BLM organization, and we need to hear what they feel about that organization, because they've been placating to it for at least a year and a half, and we need to hear what they actually think about BLM, because BLM has a stranglehold on this country, on entertainment, on sports, on pop culture. So we need to hear from the leaders of this country what they think about that organization as a whole.
And Tomi, we've been hearing you loud and clear for the last year and a half as you've been pointing out strongly the Marxist roots of that organization and how that flies in the face of the freedom they've been calling for and the like. And so it sort of begs the question, too, like, what will it take for everyone else to get on board? As you say, we're finally hearing this backlash as it spreads across the country. But at what point, how many more lives have to be lost before they get on board with people seeing the true colors there of that organization? And Kaylee, Tomi mentioned now that the White House administration, that they are now coming on board, but it was just a little bit ago that Jen Psaki refused to name communism by its name. Now, however, she's calling it a failed ideology. Let's watch.
Communism is a failed system, universally failed system. And I don't see socialism as a very useful substitute. Cuba is unfortunately, a failed state and repressing their citizens.
Communism is a failed ideology, and we certainly believe that. It has failed the people of Cuba. They deserve freedom.
Kaylee.
Why did it take 5 days to denounce communism? 5 days. 4 press briefings passed with a refusal to denounce communism. It was actually in the 4th where communism was denounced. Peter Doocy pressed her in that 3rd one on Wednesday, and there was a refusal to denounce communism. Why did it take this long? Why did it take a fever pitch of criticism from the right, and probably some in their own party as well internally, to get on what is a common sense message? You know, you go back all the way to BLM when they made that statement praising Fidel Castro. BLM went on to say that there was an overwhelming sense of loss complicated by fear and anxiety. We will come to the defense of El Comandante. That is what Black Lives Matter organization was saying in the wake of the passing of Fidel Castro. Now, contrast that with one of the more moderate members, at least on this issue, of the Democrat Party, Senator Menendez. At the time when BLM is making this statement, Senator Menendez is standing in Union City, New Jersey, at the Union of Ex-Political Prisoners of Cuba, and he said this in front of pictures of people who had been tortured and beaten. He said this: too many families have been torn apart, too many killed and imprisoned, too many tortured, too many hungry. This is a Democrat. Biden had a choice. Do I want to side with the Menendez wing of my party, a very small group, or do I want to side with AOC, BLM, and put my arms around the Cuban dictatorship? He chose the former. Never forget it, because it took 5 days to get to this point.
And Harris, as a journalist, you have seen and covered the arc of the communist regimes there in Cuba and also the American reaction to it. So does this feel different? And what is the climate like now? And why is it so different than it has been in these past decades as we've watched the oppression continue there in Cuba?
I don't know that it's a difference along the arc, right? I mean, communism doesn't really change for the people who are being oppressed. We may be able to hear and see them because of social media and other ways to gather pictures, but the press don't have the kind of freedom that would be able to show us exactly what's gone on. So I don't give them too much credit for, the country reaching a point now where suddenly the oppressed can, show us what's been going on. We still don't actually know. The dissidents in that country, those people who are holding American flags, who hold the greatness of America, Charlie alluded to this. Like, they know who we are better than some of the people in this country know who we are, right? So those people now, we don't know what happens after dark. We do know that some of them have been brutalized. I mean, we still don't know the whole story. So I don't want to say that the arc is such that it's going towards something great. We hope and pray for their freedom, but we aren't seeing it yet. And I would just quickly say this. You know, I do want to be careful, too, when we hear Biden say, socialism is not useful. Then why are they courting it? Why are we seeing bills that are so massive? Why this lean into fascism, as Tammy Bruce and I talked about last hour, between social media, big tech, and the White House wanting to watch what we do on Facebook and other platforms? Why are we leaning into the winds of socialism and fascism if they're not useful, Mr. President?
Great question.
Great question. And it seems that their fixation on these talking points and the labels or lack thereof, as we've seen, well, it doesn't have any impact on the actual details of what they're doing, which, to your point, Harris, begs the question of the trend towards socialism.